In the autumn of 1940, a woman in a silk evening gown walked through a checkpoint on the Spanish border carrying sheet music pinned inside her underwear. The border guards recognized her. Everyone in Europe recognized her. She was the most famous entertainer in France. They smiled, asked for an autograph, and waved her through. They did not check the sheet music. If they had, they would have found secret messages written in invisible ink between the bars of J. Deux Amours. Her name was Josephine Baker, and she had been a spy for over a year. Josephine Baker was born Frida Josephine MacDonald on the 3rd of June, 1906, in St. Louis, Missouri. Her childhood was defined by poverty, violence, and the rigid brutality of Jim Crow America. Her mother worked as a laundress. Her father left before she could remember him. By the age of 8, she was working as a domestic servant for white families. One of her employers scalded her hands as punishment for putting too much water in the laundry boiler. She slept in the cellar with the family dog. At 13, she was living on the streets. She danced for coins on street corners, married at 15, the first of several marriages, and by 16 had talked her way into the chorus line of a touring vaudeville show. She was not a trained dancer. What she had was an extraordinary physical intelligence, a gift for comedy, and a stage presence so magnetic that she could steal attention from the headliner while standing in the back row. In 1925, at 19 years old, she sailed to Paris with a troupe called La Revue Nègre. On opening night at the Théâtre de Champs-Élysées, she performed the Danse Sauvage, a performance that was wild, funny, provocative, and unlike anything Paris had ever seen. She became a sensation overnight. Within 2 years, she was the highest-paid entertainer in Europe. She owned a chateau, a pet cheetah named Chiquita, and a wardrobe that filled rooms. She was the first black woman to star in a major motion picture. She was adored. But the thing that mattered most to Josephine Baker about France was simpler than fame. In France, she could sit in any restaurant, walk through any door, ride any train car. No one called her the names she had grown up hearing in St. Louis. She loved France with the fierce devotion of someone who understood exactly what she had escaped. And when France was threatened, she did not hesitate. In September 1939, Germany invaded Poland, and France declared war. Josephine Baker, now 33, was living in her chateau, Les Milans, in the Dordogne. She had become a French citizen in 1937. Paris was the only home she acknowledged, and she was not going to watch it fall without doing something. The approach came from Jacques Abdi, the head of French military counterintelligence in Paris. Abdi needed agents who could move freely across borders, people who had reasons to travel that would not arouse suspicion. A world-famous performer touring neutral countries was an ideal cover. He asked Baker if she would be willing to gather intelligence for France. Her answer, as Abdi later wrote in his memoir, was immediate. "France made me what I am," she told him. "I am prepared to give my life for France." Abdi became her handler. The arrangement was elegant in its simplicity. Baker continued to perform concerts, galas, diplomatic receptions. She attended parties at embassies in Lisbon, Madrid, Casablanca, and other cities where diplomats, military attaches, and officials gathered. She listened. She remembered. She was charming and beautiful and famous, and people talked freely around her because it did not occur to them that a cabaret dancer would understand or care about troop movements, naval deployments, or political alliances. She reported everything to Abdi. Conversations overheard at the Italian embassy. Details about Axis shipping lanes mentioned casually by a Portuguese official. The location of German submarine bases picked up from a Spanish general who had had too much champagne. The identities of suspected Axis sympathizers in the French government. The mood and morale of foreign diplomats who might be turned to the Allied cause. Baker had an extraordinary memory for detail, names, dates, unit numbers, and a performer's ability to read a room, to sense who was lying and who was afraid. But the most remarkable part of her tradecraft was how she transported written intelligence. She could not carry documents, even a celebrity gets searched eventually. So she developed methods that exploited her public image. She wrote notes in invisible ink on her sheet music. She pinned microfilm documents inside her underwear. She hid photographs in her brassiere. Her logic was disarmingly practical. No border guard was going to strip-search Josephine Baker. Her fame was her armor. After France fell in June 1940, Baker refused to perform for the German occupiers. She moved south, initially to her chateau in the unoccupied zone, and then to North Africa. Under the cover of a performance tour, she traveled to Morocco, where she continued her intelligence work from Casablanca and Marrakesh. North Africa in 1941 was a world unto itself, a labyrinth of competing interests where nothing was as it appeared. Vichy French officials enforced the armistice while secretly sympathizing with the Allies. Free French operatives ran networks out of hotels and cafés. British agents moved through Tangier and Casablanca under commercial cover. American diplomats gathered intelligence while officially maintaining neutrality. Axis spies monitored everything. And local resistance networks, Arab, Berber, Jewish, European, operated in the same streets, often unaware of each other. Baker moved through this world with the ease of someone who was simultaneously everywhere and invisible. She attended receptions at the Vichy residency while secretly passing information to the Free French. She used her performances as cover for meetings with resistance contacts. In June 1941, she fell gravely ill. What began as an intestinal infection escalated into peritonitis, then a series of complications that nearly killed her. She spent over a year in and out of hospitals in Casablanca, undergoing multiple surgeries. At times, the press reported her dead. She was given last rites twice. During her long convalescence, her home in Marrakesh became an informal safe house for Free French operatives and Allied agents. Even from her sickbed, she continued to receive and pass along intelligence. Abdi stayed nearby, coordinating her reports to London and Algiers. By 1943, she had recovered enough to perform again, this time for Allied troops in North Africa and the Middle East. She flew in military aircraft to perform in tents, hangars, and open fields, entertaining soldiers from the Free French forces, the British Eighth Army, and the arriving Americans. She performed in a military uniform she had been given, with her medals, already accumulating, pinned to the jacket. She refused any payment. When asked why, she said she considered it her duty. What she did not say publicly was that the performance tours continued to serve as cover for intelligence work. She carried messages between resistance cells, observed troop concentrations, and reported on local political conditions. The dancer and the spy were the same person, and they had been the same person all along. Baker was present for the liberation of Paris in August 1944, and she performed at celebrations across the city in the weeks that followed. For the first time, her intelligence work became semi-public. General de Gaulle personally acknowledged her contributions to the Free French cause. After the war, France recognized Josephine Baker with 3 of its highest honors: the Croix de Guerre with Palm, for military valor; the Rosette de la Résistance, awarded to those who made an outstanding contribution to the resistance; and, eventually, the Légion d'honneur, the highest decoration of the French Republic. She was the first American-born woman to receive the Croix de Guerre. De Gaulle would later write that Baker had served France with a total disregard for her own safety. It was not an exaggeration. She had spent 5 years in active intelligence work, had nearly died from illness, had performed under fire in combat zones, and had never accepted a franc in payment. She considered it a debt repaid. France had given her freedom, and she had given France everything she had. She returned to her chateau at Les Millans and devoted the next 2 decades to what she called her Rainbow Tribe. 12 children she adopted from countries around the world, each of a different ethnicity, whom she raised together as a living argument against racism. It was a visionary and chaotic project that consumed her fortune and eventually bankrupted her. In 1963, she stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., wearing her Free French uniform and her medals, and spoke at the March on Washington alongside Martin Luther King Jr. She was the only woman to give a formal address that day. She told the crowd that she had left America because of racism, that France had shown her what freedom looked like, and that it was time for her own country to learn. By the late 1960s, the cost of raising 12 children on a chateau's upkeep had consumed her savings. She lost Les Milans to creditors. Princess Grace of Monaco offered her a home in the Principality, and Baker spent her final years there, still performing, still drawing crowds. Her energy was undiminished, but her body was not. She died on the 12th of April, 1975, in Paris, just days after a triumphant comeback show celebrating her 50 years on the stage. She was 68. 20,000 people lined the streets for her funeral procession. The only American-born woman ever to receive full French military honors at her burial. In 2021, Josephine Baker became the 6th woman, and the first black woman, to be interred at the Pantheon in Paris, the mausoleum reserved for France's greatest citizens. Her cenotaph rests among those of Victor Hugo, Voltaire, and Marie Curie. The full scope of her intelligence work may never be known. Much of the Deuxième Bureau's wartime archive remains classified or was destroyed during the occupation. What we do know is that a woman born in desperate poverty in the American South, who found freedom in the country that adopted her, risked everything to protect it. Not with a gun, but with sheet music, invisible ink, and the most famous smile in Europe. She understood something that professional spies often miss. The best cover is being exactly who you are, so completely that no one thinks to look deeper. If this story moved you, subscribe to follow the Untold front. New stories every week.